Welcome to the Multimedia Podcast. In this episode, I speak to Zandre Coetzer, who is a product designer currently working in London. He gives us a lot of insights into the role of data science in UX design, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Cool, so I just want to get started and say thank you so much for making the time to join me. I'm really excited to hear all about your job and all the interesting data science stuff that goes on. So yeah, thanks for making the time.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be able to speak to people who are up and coming and keen to break into the industry.
So to get started, can you tell me a little bit about what kind of work you do?
Yeah, sure. So my job is kind of loosely defined as a product designer. The reason I say it's loosely defined is because the title keeps changing. So every 3 years there's a new word for what it is. At some point it was UX design. At some point it was UI or interface design. There's interaction design. There's a whole bunch of different titles that exist for the job. But essentially, I exist to help design digital products and kind of connect, technology to business in a sense. With my job specifically, sometimes I touch upon a role that they've kind of now broadly defined as kind of product management, which is kind of focused around, more of a business angle, figuring out why we build things rather than how it's designed or what it's going to be. It's rather, why are we doing this? What should come next? How should we spend our time?
Okay,
things like that. Yes.
So sorry, to answer the why question, how do you go about answering a why? Why are we doing this question?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest question in the industry, and then probably the reason why this role has become so popular over the years. So I guess when it comes to answering a why should we build this thing and not this other thing, it comes down to, I guess, first of all is understanding your users, or understanding the people who you are designing for and who you are building this product for. So that comes with loads and loads of research and maybe finding a little nugget of insight that you might be able to align with, or a problem that you might be able to solve in a unique way, and therefore kind of extract value out of it, and then eventually that value can be turned into maybe profit, or maybe it's as simple as just elevating your experience so that you stand out amongst your competitors.
Yeah.
So when it comes to why, I think there's a qualitative angle, which is just talking to and understanding and unpacking what your users are saying.
Yeah.
And being there in the community of whoever you're servicing or whatever product you're creating. And then on the other side is the quantitative angle, which is really, this is something that as we mentioned before, is something that I've been super interested in, which is unpacking kind of key things that you focus on as a business. So if you think about a really big business, there's things like how fast the customer support team answers the phone or deals with cases from a customer.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily directly related to profit, but you might be going through the data and you see that maybe only 5% of your cases are solved within an hour, and you go and ask yourself, like, why is there 95% of cases that aren't solved quickly? So you might go look, maybe that's something we should focus on. And when you look a little deeper and maybe ask some questions or dig a little deeper, you find actually this is one of our biggest problems in our organization. And I think it's difficult for those departments to reach out to product, but because they don't necessarily think that it's something you can solve, that we can solve.
Yeah.
And then we can actually go and say, hey, well, if we change this and this, or build something here, or develop a product for you here, it helps. Across the entire organization, it helps people. So I think that if you have limited time, if you have a year and a year has four cycles in it, so 4 quarters in a year, and you only have that much capacity to build something, you have to be absolutely sure that you're building something that maximizes value.
Yes.
So I think at the end of the day, it obviously depends where you are in the business. If you're starting out as a business, then there's other things you should be focusing on, like, creating something that people love. And if people love it, then they'll maybe be willing to spend money on it. And if they're willing to spend money on it, then you can potentially survive as a business, But if it's an existing business, there's other things that people care about at that point. It might be, their competitor is stealing all their customers because the experience is just so much better. Or, maybe it's that things are costing them a lot of money. Maybe there's an aspect of their business that they didn't realize was a thing. I point at something like Facebook, where, when they started Facebook, they might have not realized that security would be or fake news would be such a place where they'd have to spend so much time and investment and money. So I guess, it's a big question. I can go on about it for hours, but why we build things, I think it's what defines a lot of businesses, especially if they're tech focused or if they're driven by a technology product.
Yeah. I think, it makes sense that you are questioning that. Otherwise, like you say, you spend time just developing something for the sake of, and it might not actually just meet the need that you have to meet.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you mentioned a little bit about the data. Can you, are you the one who does that, or is it given to you? How does that tie into your job?
Yeah. So I guess this is a weird one because I wouldn't say traditionally it ties into your job, but it is eventually where you'll end up if you keep asking questions. So essentially, you're going to start, if I put this in the context of someone who's maybe graduating university, you're going to start your career and focus heavily on, gaining a skill or being skillful at design, right? And you're going to focus on the craft itself, and you're going to evolve that over time, and you're going to get to a level where you're going to be able to do most things. You're not really going to struggle with designing things. And some work might be better than others, but generally you'll be competent at what you do. Then there's at some point in your career, you want to know whether the things that you're doing is making a difference, whether the thing that you designed, were you right when you made that decision to say, like, I'm going to put this here, or I'm going to organize this like this. Yeah. Or I think that if we do this, it will increase conversion, or whatever hypothesis you're starting your project with. You're going to ask yourself, was I right? And I guess that's where the journey started for me, where I went basically to the CTO, and I said, look, would you give me access to your database? I mean, there's nothing, if it's read only, and I can't overwrite anything or break anything, then could I just take a look?
Yeah.
And so I started playing with SQL, and I started doing some queries, and most of it was nonsense, and I learned very quickly that the way that you ask a question is insanely important, because you can lie to yourself completely. You think that you're seeing an upwards trend, but you got the query wrong. You maybe just messed up how you wrote, how you looked at the data was wrong completely.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where it started. So back then, there was a head of data science that joined, and I asked her, and just questions, like, am I doing this correctly? Should I be doing it more like this? How do I'm comparing averages here, but is that even what I should be doing?
Yeah.
And she started teaching me, it's just small things here and there. And it got so exciting that I actually decided to start a degree through UNISA.
Oh, wow.
So I just started a degree in mathematics and statistics, because I just wanted to know, like, am I doing this right? Because I think you realize very quickly that it's so easy to make a mistake, in statistics especially. So I started doing that. I did that for about a year, and then I moved to the UK. So I decided to switch my studies from UNISA to London University, where I'm studying currently.
Okay.
And now I've changed the degree slightly, so now it's in data science and business analytics. And data science is a very big buzzword, but I guess it just means that you're doing statistics, but also computer science. You're also, you're coding a little bit to get the data in and out, and to move it around, and to do things with it. So it's a fancy word, but it just means, statistics. And maybe, there's some machine learning in there a bit later, but it's just fancy statistics, I think.
Okay, so where are you at now in your degree with that?
So I am going into second year pretty soon. But I think a big part of what I did when I was, being mentored by the head of product at Leadome was the head of data science at Lidl, was a lot of, I guess, more sophisticated things, but probably too soon to be doing things like that. But as I'm studying now and I'm kind of unpacking the basics a little bit more. Officially, I'm just finishing first year now,
Okay.
and it's been awesome. It's been illuminating and useful in ways that I didn't expect it to be.
And you're obviously studying in the evenings, I'm guessing, after your work.
Yeah, so it's a distance learning course, which means that you kind of you progress. There's a recommended speed at which you should progress through the course, but you can move as quickly or as slowly as you want. So I study, part time in the evenings, sometimes on weekends, but it's maybe 9 to 10 hours a week extra.
Okay. So just as a side note for anyone who may not have the resources to do another degree, I don't know if you know anything about something like Udemy, where you could maybe do a short course on data science. Do you think that would be sufficient, or is that just going to sort of maybe that'll get your feet wet and then you'll have to learn more? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the only reason I'm doing a degree is because I want to focus a bit more on the academic world as well. So, I'd like to contribute academically to the world. And to do that, I need to start with an undergrad, and then maybe I can contribute academically maybe in the future when I do a master's or maybe a PhD later. But essentially, it comes from more of a love of academia. Where I think if you're curious about this as a tool in your toolbox and something you want to use to look at the impact that some of your designs are making, I would say start with just super basic. Go to Khan Academy. It's free. Do the AP statistics course. That's the first year statistics. It's free. It's videos only. There's some exercises and activities and all sorts of things. Do that. Get a refresher course on just normal statistics. How statistics works.
Yeah.
Then I would say there's a platform called Kaggle, which is a data science platform, and what they essentially have is hundreds of thousands of data sets that are just available to you. And with those data sets, there are questions that they ask, where the answer is available for you to look at. But it's really fun to take a crack at it yourself. For example, one might be using the data from the Titanic, but only the data before the accident happened. Can you predict who's going to die and who isn't based on where their bunk was and things like that?
Wow.
So that's a very famous first question with data science, where you use machine learning to actually to build a model that predicts. Well, you don't have to use machine learning, but that's part of the fun. So so essentially, I would start first with basic statistics. You can use something like DataCamp as well. That is paid for, but it's like a interactive type of learning for data science specifically. But I don't like the word data science because it makes it sound like it's a whole different field, or like it's some sort of buzzword kind of very technical field, and it is extremely technical. But the usage that maybe it should just be called analytics. Data analysis. Maybe we'll park it there. So essentially, the craft of being able to look at a database, query it, create a graph, understand what you're looking at, and being able to filter it in interesting ways to get results and know when you're making a mistake. So I would say if anyone wants to start going down that road, I would say Khan Academy. And then secondly, there's a book by someone called David Spiegelalter, and he's a very famous statistician, and he wrote a book called The Art of Statistics, where he basically all he does is he talks about cases that he worked on in his life, and it might give you insight into why I keep saying it's easy to make mistakes. So he has the questions he answers is things like, there was a doctor who was suspected of euthanizing their patients, and he needed to prove that there was that the times at which those patients died was not random. It was coincidental, and it's very unlikely that all of their deaths would happen in that way. And so basically, the questions he deals with is very important questions you can't get wrong, or questions you can't, can't mess up.
Yeah.
So in this book, he just talks about, he doesn't really go into the math that much. He just goes into the approach, like how you think about the problems. And and when he discusses these problems, you kind of realize, how to, ask a statistical question. As an example, in taking it back to the design context, did my redesign of a sign-in page or a sign-in flow, did it increase conversion? And that question is, if you consider maybe there was a marketing campaign at the time and, there was a big bump in the number of people that visited, or, maybe there was a different change, or maybe there was a developer who deployed something that sped up the loading times and that had an effect. So the question is like, how do you design an experiment or just a question that's going to tell you whether there is in fact a significant increase, and how do you take that and tell a story back to your stakeholders or your the rest of the business to say, we made this difference, and you don't feel like you're lying, or you feel like you're not qualified to make a data analysis. It's really to get yourself to the point where you feel confident about what you're saying and how you're presenting it.
Sure. It's so interesting. I've never heard of this angle before, but I think, like you say, it's a bit of a buzzword, data science, but I think also so is big data, and these kinds of skills kind of go hand in hand. But it sounds like it's so handy. I'm also dabbling in it myself for other reasons, and I'm finding it's kind of like a skill that I wish I knew before. It's just so handy to have. So yeah, thanks for the helpful tips. Something I actually want to ask you. What kind of products do you design? Like, is there a general category, or do you just do all sorts?
Yeah, so I specifically planned to not do one specific industry because I didn't want to get kind of trapped. And this is talking more about the job space, but essentially, when you're working in the industry, it's if you're sure about what you want to do, if there's like a specific space that really excites you, then get a lot of experience in that space, because then people will keep hiring you. It'll be super easy to go on from there. But within my career, I kind of switched out a lot. So I focused. The start of my career was focused on business to business type applications. So one business would say, "Hey, I've got an application that would help you." Connect maybe your logistics to some agents or whatever it is, and design those kind of things. So that was a lot of body of knowledge type things where you had to understand the industry really well, and that takes a bit of time. You have to ask a lot of questions, interview a lot of people. So I did that for a while, and then I off the back of that I joined kind of a web development, or not web development, just general development agency. And in that time, I worked on all sorts of things, from people who wanted to make an app out of a board game, other people who were doing, it's like an analytics platform for interventions in schools to know if the money spent in schools is making a difference. So that was a product that we worked on, from insurance products to, there was a memorial service product that I worked on in that time. So I worked on quite a lot of different things in that kind of agency time.
Yeah.
And then I joined a company called Lead Home, which you may not have heard of.
Yeah.
They're a real estate company. And I joined them just because they were making big waves in the tech industry. A lot of people were talking about them. And I interviewed with them. I got the job there, and that's kind of direct to consumer. So now I'm dealing with direct to the customer, and that's kind of where also a lot of the data stuff started, because when you're creating products for businesses, you can just go to them and ask them, right? You can just say, "Is this working for you?" Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But if you're designing for a faceless mass of 100,000 people, and you have no idea if what you did made a difference or people like it or not.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could get some anecdotal evidence. You can maybe get a few people in a room and say, do you like this? And they'll go like, yes, maybe because they're getting paid for their time or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you could survey people, which no one ever opens those surveys, and yeah. And so you eventually start relying on the data part really heavily, because it's really low effort, and if you have enough data points, you can start asking really interesting questions. So I still don't think it's the be and end all, but it's become one of the most powerful tools to keep you laser focused on whatever you're doing. If someone says redesign this application versus all I want you to do is like I mentioned before, increase the amount of cases that get closed in an hour. That's a very different design problem.
Yes, yeah.
You're not gonna think about necessarily, oh, this visual thing here or this visual thing here, especially if, I mentioned a bit of the product management side of things where, you set out, your squad has a mission to achieve, maybe it's something like that, optimize the customer support team. So in the beginning of the quarter, you go, what we're going to focus on is case closing time, whatever. And then at the end of the quarter, you're going to have to go back and be like, this thing that we said in the beginning, did we do this or did we not do this thing that we said we were going to do in the beginning? So I think essentially your design becomes very, very laser focused when you have this very clear objective rather than just saying, we design. And I think that in that way, the industry's changed a lot. In the beginning, it was kind of maybe a kind of a business person saying, build me this or design me this. Where now it's becoming very decentralized. You have squads have missions, and those missions are, you're pretty autonomous within the bounds of that mission. So, it might be security might be your mission, like increase the security of our platform. And then you start the quarter by saying, this is what we're going to do. And business signs off on those objectives. And then you set out to do them. And then you have to come back and say, we took meaningful steps to change this. And that's difficult because you can't just say that, I did some designs, I spent hours designing it. It's like there was, the outcome was positive, not the time I spent in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think it's the industry has changed, and I think the data has become a really powerful tool of measuring whether you're making a difference. And it's not necessarily things with like ROI or like, cash. Sometimes it is. Sometimes your squad is, right at the bottom line, and you're doing things that are super impactful on money at the end of the day. But most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, it's other things. Maybe it's, customers just want to be happier using a certain thing, and that's your focus is customer happiness, and you have to do things that improves that. So, yeah, it's changed a lot, and it's very interesting.
Sure. So it sounds really cool. I'm assuming you're not the only one, the only UX designer who deals with the data side. Are there lots of people that that do it, or just you? Is it a new thing, basically?
I think it is a bit of a new thing. I think you'll find a lot of product managers. If you look at the job spec, they'll be required to know a bit of SQL. They would need to know how to do data analysis. And there's a new type of role that I've seen float around called a product analyst. Which is a job that's just focused on analyzing the success of certain products and understanding what they're doing from a data side, which is a super interesting role in itself. Like I've kind of stuck in the product design space because it's kind of where the most of my experience is. So often when companies hire you, they're looking for that wealth of design experience, but then often. Over time, my role kind of progresses into a more like a bit of a hybrid role sometimes. But yeah, for me, the data thing is maybe more of a product management thing. But I think if you are a designer who is curious about what your designs are doing out in the world and what's happening, it's worthwhile. And there are analytics tools, and I know what it feels like to be a designer who goes into like Google Analytics or whatever it is, because you understand some of it, but other parts of it you're just kind of like, nah, like I don't really have to think about that. Very few designers will go like, okay, I'm going to read, the guides on each one of these metrics, like what. So, example, I was looking at some retention and how it was measured on a specific platform, and I literally had to read like a 20-page white paper just to understand, the different settings, like what each setting was doing. Yeah. Because that's not traditional statistics. That's like a whole, it's just something specifically designed for products and how you measure whether your users are coming back on a daily basis. So I think there's a lot of information there. And it is, but kind of, I think the message here is that you have to keep an open mind as a designer. Creativity is your superpower at the end of the day. But I think the world kind of forces you to be like, either you're creative or you're or you're technical, or you're analytical, and you have to be one or the other. And I think that as you're as you stretch your creative bone, like I would encourage you to also stretch your analytical bone, and kind of don't kind of step down from the challenge of taking up that challenge. Like you might not have done well in kind of more scientific subjects in school, but I challenge you to try it when you're out of school. It's different. You have more motivation. The tools are more useful because now you're doing it with purpose. It's not just someone telling you to factorize some equation or something. It is. So I think the message here is kind of I've kind of found a tool set within statistics that helps me with my day-to-day job. And other designers do something different. Other designers are super focused on user research, and that's like that's like the most useful tool for them, because maybe they have a really good pipeline set up. Maybe the product they're working on is more aligned to a qualitative aspect rather than a quantitative aspect. So as an example, the company I just literally finished my last day on Friday. Which is a learning platform for high schoolers, and the data angle was less interesting than the qualitative angle in this specific case, because what we were measuring was do people come online, do they stay online, and are we growing? That was the extent of it. There wasn't really business metrics like are people or are departments being really performant or whatever it is. It's just very simple metrics. But on the other hand, we were interviewing about six students a week. So, we're talking to students all the time, and we're asking them, how do you feel during COVID? What is your biggest challenge with your learning currently? What would you change? And I think those answers were way more interesting at the end of the day than, some of the quantitative research that we could have done, that we were doing. I think in that specific case, maybe asking questions was a better approach anyway, because we were dealing with motivation. We were dealing with an emotive thing.
Yeah.
I think don't close yourself off to tools in the toolbox, and also take up the challenge. It's not. I think that for me, creativity has also always been this really interesting skill, because it's different from analytical skills in that you're not following a set of rules per se. There are rules in there, there's Gestalt principles for how to design and what happens when you see colors and things like that. But at the end of the day, it comes with a wealth of experience. If you design a lot, you're going to become a good designer. And I think that's a different type of skill than like an analytic skill, where you're learning a body of knowledge and you're saying, I'm going to remember that and I'm going to execute it according to the set of rules. But both are interesting, and both are, I think, worth exploring and kind of stretching like a muscle.
Yeah, I really love that perspective, that actually as a designer you can be both. You don't have to fit this mold. Can you tell me what is your favorite part of your job, and then also something that frustrates you about your job?
Okay. What's my favorite part of my job? I guess so one of the things that you're going to find, and especially maybe with the students you mentioned, they're kind of thinking that they might all end up as developers. So I think that I've dabbled in development for a long time as well, and it's one of those things where I didn't get into development because I wasn't going to be the person creating the thing. You were creating the thing, but you were more creating what somebody else, kind of gave you to create.
Yeah.
So I think my favorite part about my job is that at the end of the day, the blank canvas kind of belongs to you. Like, it might be a little massaged. They might tell you, you can only do this, don't go here or don't do that. But at the end of the day, that canvas is yours, and you can start painting it. And you might start your career as maybe a junior, and maybe there's somebody else who has more say than you. But eventually, you're going to end up being able to design whatever you want. And when that day comes, it's really nice. It's really nice to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I like the most about my job. I think what I like the least about my job is I think maybe it's good and bad. In my job, in the job of product design, a lot of what your job is every day is telling stories, and kind of and creating a narrative. One thing you're gonna learn, well, it doesn't matter if you're a product designer or a graphic designer, or it doesn't really matter. You're gonna do it. You're always gonna have to explain why you did something, and that's often difficult, because if you go too technical, then people just don't listen. So if you go like, oh, I'm doing this because of this principle and this principle and this principle, then nobody cares about the theory. So you're often faced with telling a lot of stories and convincing people of why you did things, and you'll often find that sometimes it's it's wildly inconsistent when people will go with what you said and when they won't go with what you said, and it all comes down to how well you told the story. And I think that in a way it's bad because if you look at other professions, maybe there's not as much that people have to explain what they do. You don't see like a developer, telling the CEO whatever, like this is how I'm coding because of these. They just go like, does it work or doesn't it work, right? And maybe that's a challenge for the design industry in itself. How do we measure, whether, or how do we hold someone accountable for design, and if all of the decisions are kind of made by as a group. But I think that if you as you get further into the field, you learn to tell a good story, and a good story then builds trust, and people end up listening to what you have to say, and often go with the decisions you want to make.
Okay.
So that just comes down to sometimes data helps there. That's a really good one, where you go like, I saw this and let me show you why it's interesting because of these reasons. The theory here is if we change this, then this will happen. And becoming really good at debate, right? Because you're going to be debating most of the time. If it's not with a business stakeholder, it's going to be with the developer, and sometimes the debates are hard. Sometimes they raise some really, really good points. And you just have to say like, I think your point is valid, but I still think we should go with this, and I am going to go with this, regardless of regardless of the feedback you've given, which is sometimes tough. And I think that is simultaneously a good thing, but also probably the worst part about the job is you always have to be convincing people. Like you're never really going to be in a position where someone just blindly trusts you and says, go ahead and design whatever you want, however you want.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. How did you actually get into this field? Like, what did you study? Where did you study?
So I got into this field completely by accident. So I studied audio post-production. I'm a bit of a musician, and I have been since I was very little. I studied music and audio post-production, and I ended up really struggling to find a job. But luckily for me, when I was in high school, I was very interested in After Effects and motion graphics. So I'd been making animation videos, as a high schooler, and so going into kind of the job market, and I was kept on looking, and eventually I just I thought like, well, I have to make money some way, so I basically just try to reach out to some clients, ask them. I told them, look, this is a cheap way for you to do marketing. I can animate some videos. You can put them on as either banners or send them to clients, use them for presentations, whatever it may be. And one of my clients they were creating a lot of apps, so they wanted to showcase these apps to these clients in a more kind of flashy way. And I had built up a database of like voiceover artists, and so I would animate. I'd get a voiceover artist in, do this whole thing, compose the music, do the whole thing. And so that client actually said, look, and it kind of came from small tweaks to the app over time. So I was like, the app doesn't look too great here, so I changed this as this. And then they were like, oh, we really like the changes you made. And then they hired me as a UI designer, while also doing some of these animation videos.
Wow.
So it was kind of by accident.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I just kept on going. I kept on doing the same thing as much as I could. There's a few times when I kind of jumped back to animation for a while, and then kind of back to kind of interface design. And then it kind of became more and more. Yeah, I kind of pulled more and more back from design in itself. As you do as you go further in your career, you're focusing more on maybe a bit of people management here or there, stakeholder management, and I think that's kind of where you start asking. People will trust you in making decisions about things in a more global sense. They would say, "Hey, we want you to set out the goals for the next quarter for your squad," as an example. And then your design is, you're focused on the broad strokes, and maybe someone else focuses very much on the details. This drop down, this button, this, and you're focused on, should we put this thing here? Should we focus on emails? Should we not focus on emails? And then in that kind of way, the product manager world starts, bleeding into each other a little bit.
So something I've always wondered is it nice to move from designing lots to more product management, like team management? Because I would think that as a designer, I mean, you'd love to do the blank canvas thing that you mentioned. And what does it feel like to move away from that and towards less hands-on, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I'm not convinced about my own answer just yet. So I guess for me in my career, I've been focusing a lot on the idea of leadership and what the hell that means, and how do you, because I think in the beginning of your career, especially designers, people are hungry for doing good work and being, you think about awards, you think about craftsmanship and being at the top of your game in terms of design. And I think I really believe that everyone should go through that. It is, I think it's crucial for you to really, if you think about it, like you're either the blade or you're the handle of a knife. And first you're the blade, you do the cutting, you're executing, you're making things amazing. And I think when you go through that, you understand what good is, you learn what good is. Over time, you understand what quality looks like. But then, I guess as you go further into your career, maybe you get into a relationship and you get a dog, and you start realizing that career is an important part of your life, but there's more to life, and you start having to care about other people, and then it starts then you start thinking about your squad as a whole. Like, what does it mean to be a good squad? It's not just smashing so many designs as you possibly can and just being super performant. It also means that there's a flow of good ideas. People don't get burnt out. People are happy. They're super passionate about what they do. They're kind of giving their time to the squad, not because they're like out of fear or anything like that. It's because they're super passionate about the what they're doing. And I think creating an environment like that is also an interesting tool in the toolbox, right? So I think for me now, it's more fun for me in this case, because you've designed a lot, and you probably don't get that much stimulation out of it anymore. Like a good idea still makes you super excited if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, I cracked it, I figured out how to solve this problem. Then it's great. Then you still get that kick. But I think for me it's really interesting trying to create good culture and trying to create a team that really works well together, and that's at the end of the day we can high five and walk out of the office and not be super high strung and burnt out.
Yeah, kind of sounds like your priorities change as you mature as a person working in a job or in your career. Your priorities change, and certain things become more important, and other things that you could never have thought would become important do become important.
Yeah, and I think it's a path that you kind of have to walk. You have to want to have the pat on the back from your superiors for a while, and then when that gets old, you may be like, okay, well, now I want people to trust me who are my team members. I want them to be like, oh, we really love working with you. That's like a different type of, interesting in your career. But I think at the end of the day, like as there's no, I don't think there's a finish line to all of this. You're not working towards a specific thing. I mentioned a bit of debate earlier is useful in your career. A bit of philosophy, I think, is also super interesting and useful to read upon and reflect upon. So I don't think there's a finish line to all of this. I think just being present in whatever you're doing. So right now, if you're student studying, maximizing your potential when you walk out of university is probably the biggest thing or the highest thing in your mind right now. You want to focus on, am I getting good marks? Am I growing? Am I learning the things? Do I feel prepared when I walk into a job? Once you're in a job, you might be the first 3 months you're going to stress yourself to death because of your probation or your period, your notice period that you're going to be working before you're and that's going to be your biggest worry. And I think that it has to happen in a certain order. And I think it's like I don't think there's a shortcut to it. It's just reflecting at every point in your career, not really getting stale. Like think about what you're trying to do. Where are you at? What do you want to do next? Because those are the kind of questions you're going to be asked when you're applying for jobs, right? They're going to ask you, what do you want to do for the next 5 years? And if you reflect on these things a lot, and someone asks you a question like, what do you value in a team? You're not going to be like, I don't know how to answer that. You're gonna probably be able to give a cohesive answer because you've thought about it a lot. I think that it's you have to go through the steps. You have to experience all the different different parts of growth in a career.
It's a very cool perspective, actually. I really enjoy that. So moving on to some tips that you could give to potential or students potentially wanting to enter the industry, what skills would you say are the most important for someone in this industry to have?
So if you look at skills that you can learn like very quickly, and those are things that have to do with knowledge, right? So learning how to do a usability test or learning how to interview someone, that is, you do gain experience over time and you learn how to really connect with the person you're talking and when to dig and when to not dig. But I think that something you can't learn is just skillful, I guess, skillful visual design, or the kind of aesthetic angle. That's something you have to practice. That takes it's like playing the violin or something like that. You're not going to just learn by reading a book and then you can play the violin. It doesn't work that way. You have to sit for hours and days and years practicing. So I think that my tip for designers is just design a lot. It's all of the knowledge that you're learning about, the types of techniques and methods and things that happen with, around the aspect of designing, like workflows and certain ways of doing things in terms of maybe operationally, like ops type things. They will change by the time you leave university. There's going to be like 10 new books out, with new things to do and new ways of doing things. The software you're learning right now is going to change probably as well. What you want to practice is your eye. You want to get good at seeing what good is and what quality is. So I think my top tip for designers is just be bold in the things that you're designing. Like don't just kind of do the small easy things. Like try to do a really like a bigger chunk of work. Like maybe if you're a multimedia designer, try to make a short film if you're like an animator or something. Like even if it's maybe it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because you're gonna see things that you haven't seen before. Things like what it feels like to work on a project for a month, like straight. That's a different. It's different to kind of hammer away at something for a really long time, and you're going to learn how to learn to work a little faster, to know when you need to go back to something, when you need to cut something, when you have to put something in, and that kind of eye for quality. That's difficult. That's difficult to find in almost any designer, because it's the some amount of time that they've learned or they've designed or worked on things. Where things like does a designer understand a specific process, or is there a specific piece of theory that they understand or not? I would say that's less important, because you can just upskill them. You can just say, maybe if I had a one-to-one with a designer, I could tell them, your research theory is not up to scratch yet. So maybe we can do a course together, over the next month. Just update your knowledge on this. But yeah, you can't go back and win the years of designing as a student. And so just design a lot. That's kind of my top tip.
Okay, so just time invested, basically.
Yeah.
In terms of a portfolio for applying for a job, is it recommended? And if so, how? What kind of format? And how do you go about doing that as a first-time job applicant?
So I think, I've recently applied for jobs. So like, if I think back on my application experience, something that a lot of people are doing these days is like they're focusing on case studies. They're focusing on these kind of end-to-end kind of project. They want to see that there was a problem that you set out to solve in some way, and then this is kind of how you built up to solving that problem. Maybe you did some interviews or some research or whatever. Now you can imagine as a student that's quite difficult to get because you have to get someone to give you a project to be able to show that you've done. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So I think dream scenario, you'd find maybe like a charity or something that needs help doing something, and you could potentially tell them that I do it for free, and really focus on don't just jump straight into the design. Take the time, write out the problem, explore the problem, unpack it, and write some initial thoughts, write down the assumptions you're making, really, really take your time building up to it, because then you can take all of that stuff and you can piece it together as a story. And when you show that as a first-time job applicant, if you can show that you identified a problem, you built up to solving that problem, and then maybe if you're lucky, maybe there's some way of showing that you have solved the problem at the end of the day, where maybe you have just a snippets of quotes from the person you did the work for, and they just said, amazing work, or we really like this and really helped us, or whatever it is. If they have data, next amazing, that would be awesome. But I think that's one perspective. If you have a case study type thing and trying to find an excuse to do one, whether it's self motivated. I mean, that's something you can also do. Look inside your own community. Is there a problem that can be solved with design? And then, it might cost you a few bucks, because of, I don't know, maybe $200, $300 for printing stuff or doing something. But at the end of the day, that's going to pay back dividends, because you'll be able to show, like, I identified this problem. This is how I went to solve it. And I think back on all the portfolios I saw, and I'm not really interested if it is for someone or not for someone. I don't care if students come out and they go like, oh, I was an intern at, wherever it was, or Google or whatever, that obviously makes their portfolio stand out. But I think the industry is kind of getting over that now. They're focused a lot more on show me a story, show me not just a picture of something that looks good, but also not just a hordes and hordes of wireframes or something like that. Show me a story, something that starts with a problem, evolves, and I think a really good place to go look at things like that is go and look at, I'm trying to remember the company's name. So there was Weno. So it's a design agency in, I think it's in Iceland, but they're also in America. They write the most amazing case studies, just because they're the best copywriter I've ever seen. So they have these amazing case studies, which they write about their clients' projects that they worked on. Then there's also, I might have to email a few to put it as in the comments. But essentially, it's another agency that also does the same thing. So they show, it might start with just like a collage of logos that they tried, and then it just shows like how they kind of went to deciding on the final product, and like how the narrative changed over time. So it's kind of like writing a rationale. It's like what you learn when you're studying. So like it's like writing a rationale, but tell a good story, a short story, and show me proof. Show me. So if you're saying that we made this decision because of this thing, put a person in there and mention them by name and maybe have like a quote or something. Because at the end of the day, the person looking at this is going to skim it. Like they're not going to read it word for word. But just big, nice titles that are very descriptive, so that if I do skim it, I'm going to see everything, and then I might, if I'm super interested in the project, I might go and read every bit of it. So I think that there's just tell a story. Don't just have lots and lots of design. Rather have like 2 big stories, and I'd be more than happy. Or even just one big story and maybe a few extra bits and bobs of things that you've worked on. So I would say that's really what you should be focusing on your portfolio. And in terms of your the resume and things like that, you don't have to try and like oversell. You know what I mean? Like if someone's hiring someone out of university, they're not expecting them to have years and years and years of experience. I think what is interesting is to show that the person has been busy. So whether that is looking or participating in any kind of university things, or like maybe they had an article or something that they wrote about their experience with like a specific Figma thing. Maybe they wrote a small thing where they wrote like a Premiere Pro tutorial or something like that. Those kind of things, that shows me that this person is taking initiative, that they're they're participating, and they're hungry for more experience and learning. So I think that try to fill your resume with as much things, but it doesn't have to be super impressive. Like we're not asking you to go and have worked for all these companies or whatever. We're just asking you to participate in the design community in some way, right?
And almost just show your passion and show that you're constantly learning and developing yourself. That makes a lot of sense. And I think your tip for the portfolio is very helpful. I mean, I haven't heard that one before, and I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if someone's looking at 20 plus resumes. They're not going to look through your 20-page design document, but if you tell a story and you tell it well, then that gets the idea across.
There's one thing I could also mention. There's so when we interviewed there's a guy called Caleb Shavalala, he's a great designer as well. So when we interviewed him for Lead Home, the first thing, so we gave him a home job, and when he came back from the home job, the first thing he opened was like a Word document, right? So he started and went like, this is what I unpacked from the brief, and this is how I thought about the problem first. And it was the only person who had come back and kind of, they weren't focused on like the visual aspect of the design. They did eventually get there, but they were focused more on, did I understand the problem correctly, and did I unpack it and kind of ask questions and try to find a good approach to the problem before I start doing anything. And I think that was just super refreshing, to be honest, to see that someone's very considerate before they go and start pencil to paper and start working.
Yeah, sure. So we've reached the end of our time, but is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish? Anything that we haven't said yet?
I don't think there's anything specific, unless you have any last questions. I don't have anything specific. We've
covered mostly everything. I think the only question I missed was why London. How did you end up in London? If it's job related, of course.
So about 2 years ago, actually maybe 3 years ago now. So 3 years ago, I had a job offer to go to London, but I'd also had an offer to go with a company locally, and that offer seemed a bit more interesting. And as well as if I signed an offer with a company in the UK, I would have to be kind of tied to them, which means that if I ever wanted to leave, I would have to renew my visa, or I'd have to come back to South Africa and apply again. So around that time, I just decided to take the South African job, but I was like, I want to go back to the UK. So then I found a visa called Technation in the UK, which basically endorses you as an individual if you show talent in the tech industry in any way. If you're a data scientist, a developer, a product designer, even an entrepreneur.
Sure.
So essentially, and I had to, I took a long time to prepare an application for that because the application is quite difficult. And that took about 2 years. But eventually, after that, I applied and I got the visa. Then I moved. So it's definitely career related. I think I like the UK tech industry. It's kind of a sister industry to Silicon Valley. It's like the other tech industry that's really booming. So I kind of chose London. I think Silicon Valley is a bit crazy right now.
Yeah.
So it kind of chose the UK, and that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. So, just out of interest, that visa, what is it? Is it to work and live there for, like, permanently, or how does it work?
So it's basically called the Emerging Talent Visa. So essentially, you get clearance to stay here for 5 years, and in those 5 years, you have to demonstrate that you have contributed, to the tech industry. So you have to, show contracts, maybe talk at a few conferences, whatever you can do to show that you're contributing to the tech industry, and then you have to submit that evidence, and then you can get leave to remain. So that just means you can stay as long as you want.
Oh, wow.
And then at that point, you can then start looking at applying for citizenship maybe after 10 years or so. So yeah, it gives you 5 years, but you're not bound to any company or anything. You can
that's
start,
awesome.
You can do whatever you want. Start your own business, study, whatever it is.
Sure. Very, very cool. So I think that's the end of the interview. Zandre, thank you so much for all your wisdom. It definitely is wisdom. I've learned a lot from you, and I think you've brought a really interesting perspective on product design and UX in general. So thank you so much for making the time.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time to chat. Hope you have a great week further, and hopefully we can chat soon.